Our story begins in the Chesterfield Orphanage in Los Angeles. Calvin Cambridge is a smart boy who loves basketball and doesn't let any bullies get him down. When a boy named Ox shows up to challenge him for his jersey, he refuses to back down, even when his friends Murph and Reg advise against it. They say the boy's gonna beat him up anyway, so at least he should keep the jersey. As we can see, they had a point there. Loving the sport doesn't mean you're any good at it. So Calvin ends up losing his jersey to Ox, who makes sure to ruin it, just for fun. Slightly annoyed, Calvin says he'll have a bunch of new ones when he gets adopted by a nice family. He says he wants a family, just like those you see on these shows where everyone gets along. That's when the TV is abruptly turned off. Stan Biddleman, the orphanage director, tells them to get to work. Not ashamed to explore little orphans, Stan makes the boys sell candy when the Los Angeles Knights are playing. Each kid has their own marketing strategy. Ox, for example, aggressively informs potential customers that he won't eat if they don't buy anything. Passing by Calvin, a middle-aged man tells his daughters that kids like him are always scammers, and they should never give them any money. After the game, Murph complains they haven't done very well tonight, which means they could lose their TV privileges. The thing is, they never sell much when the Knights lose, and that's getting more and more common. Coach Wagner is outside the stadium waiting for his car. Calvin decides to push some candy to the man, taking the opportunity to give his opinion about the team and their star players. Tracy Reynolds. Ignoring the boy's expertise, Wagner points out it's a school night. Do his parents know he's out so late? Learning that Calvin is an orphan, he decides to buy a chocolate bar. Calvin says he's a fan and refuses to charge him. He confesses that the money might not go to the group home anyway. Impressed by such honesty, the coach offers him tickets for the Sunday game instead. Next morning, all the kids are in their best outfits at Chesterfield. Several families are there to browse the catalog and hopefully take a child or two from Stan's hands. Calvin says he has a good feeling about today, but Ox tells him to get real. None of the older kids have a real chance. Sister Theresa arrives with the donation box, saying that one of the winter coats seems to be Murph's size. When she picks it up, a pair of sneakers fall off. Immediately interested, Calvin tries them on. They're a perfect fit. According to Sister Theresa, the guy who dropped them off said they once belonged to a famed basketball player. Evidently not a fan of the sport, the nun says it was the tall and bald one. Great help, sister. With a closer look, Calvin finds the initials MJ. He calls his friends to see that right away. Could those be Michael Jordan's childhood sneakers? Could it be that something good has finally happened to this boy? Well, not yet. Ox makes sure to ruin that too. Taking the shoes from Calvin's hands, he throws them over the power line. Probably not really Jordan's, he says. Nobody donates anything but junk. Not convinced by the pessimism, Calvin keeps staring at the window while the other kids sleep. He wakes up Murph to say they gotta get those sneakers. Severely sleepy, Murph is now more inclined to agree with Ox. It's not worth the hassle. They're probably not Jordan's anyway. Calvin says he knows they are. And he can't wait until morning because Ox will be there. So they wake up Reg, and the three musketeers tiptoe outside, under the pouring rain. The other two bite their fingernails watching Calvin climb the tree. He manages to grab the shoes with a lot of effort, but the laces are still entangled with the line. As he's trying to pull them free, the tree is struck by lightning. Electricity spreads through the power line, the sneakers, and the boy. Calvin falls on the ground with the shoes sitting on his chest, still sparkling. Come Sunday and the Knights are playing against the Minnesota Timberwolves. The kids are excited to see an actual NBA game for the first time. Of course, that's when Ox shows up, threatening to narc on them. But Calvin is ready for that. He buys his silence with an extra ticket. The game starts and once again, Tracy Reynolds is not really living up to his star player status. By the end of the first half, the Timberwolves are 12 points ahead of the Knights. Talking to Tracy in private, Frank Bernard says he received a call from Mr. Granger, the man who owns the team. He hadn't talked to him in 4 years, which usually means things are great. That's not the case anymore. Under that kind of pressure, Tracy is forced to put up with the halftime show he hates so much. Today, one of the fans will get a chance to go one-on-one with him. Frank tells the audience to check their ticket stubs for the number he's about to call. When the kids realize it's Calvin's number, Ox tries to steal his ticket, but falls for an old trick and fails. Calvin gets down there, shakes Tracy's hand, and grabs the mic for a shout-out to the orphanage. The kid is a huge hit with the audience, and Frank is pleased at such a lucky pick. Before the contest, Calvin whispers to his beloved and storm-struck sneakers, "Make me like Mike." Tracy has been instructed to let the little boy score at least once. It turns out that won't be a problem. While Stan is ignoring the game altogether to play chess by himself, the crowd is going wild, and Tracy is getting embarrassed. One more shot, and Calvin wins the $1,000 prize. The ball bounces off the board, but the boy jumps up just in time for a slam dunk. The entire stadium is completely frozen in disbelief. It's like they have just seen a person actually fly. Murph's applause breaks the spell and starts a standing ovation. Still hanging from the hoop, Calvin wonders if this is a bad time to ask for Tracy's autograph. After the game, Frank disrupts Stan's concentration to schedule a meeting with Coach Wagner. Later on, the three men discuss the possibility of getting Calvin to play for the Knights. Both Stan and Wagner are a little skeptical about Calvin's modest stature. But Frank is all about the press circus that he'll get around it, which is guaranteed to sell a bunch of tickets. Stan looks a bit more accessible at the mention of monetary gains, quickly reminding the gentleman about his perks as the boy's guardian. Frank offers him $7,500 for a one-day contract. Murph and Reg are over the moon to hear that their best friend will join the NBA. Calvin confesses that he could never play like that to save his life. He suspects this is all about MJ's sneakers. He should not have said that with Ox around, but he's too happy to be careful. A few days later, Calvin is at the Knights' locker room, and everyone is mocking Tracy for the fiasco. Frank gives him the custom-made uniform, which includes a brand new pair of sneakers. Calvin panics and begins to explain that he plays much better with his own shoes. Laughing at the boy's delusions, Frank clarifies that he's not here to play. All he has to do is look good and smile for the cameras. Calvin is a bit upset to think of his friends in the audience, who are there just to see him. But soon, the excitement to join the team takes over his mind. The Knights are not at their best during the beginning of the game, and the coach asks for timeout. Making his way through the giant legs of the other players, Calvin offers an unsolicited and detailed strategy to improve their chances. Coach Wagner likes it, but the players don't want to obey a little kid. Fed up with these so-called stars, Wagner says Calvin is replacing one of them. Frank is appalled at this decision and tries to talk him out of it, but it's too late now. Calvin is desperate because he's wearing the wrong shoes, so he calls timeout a few seconds after the game restarts. Now everyone thinks he has chickened out. He runs to the locker room and puts on the MJs. Now he's ready to rock and roll. The Knights run the play just as he said before, and Calvin scores. And then he scores again, and again, and then another slam dunk. The Knights win the game against all odds, and Frank shamelessly takes the credit for picking Calvin. Soon our boy is on the news as the youngest and shortest person ever to sign a deal with the NBA. So Calvin is packing his bags now, and Stan comes to have a little chat. He says people might want to adopt him while he's on the road with the Knights, but he should know it's not because they like him. They only want his money. Besides, he's under contract. That contract was signed by Stan as his legal guardian, so that cannot change if he wants to keep playing. On the plane, Tracy is trying to control his fear of flying with guided meditation, but Coach Wagner is not very sensitive to that. He interrupts him to bring up the NBA mentoring program. Tracy will be rooming with the newcomer. As you can imagine, only one of them is excited about that. Tracy tries to get rid of him to go on a date, so he tells him to call room service. Calvin has never heard of that. Amazed that people will bring him free food, he orders way more than he could possibly eat. When Tracy gets back with the girl, the room is a disgusting mess. And what is worse, his date recognizes the junior player immediately and decides to babysit him for the rest of the evening. Tracy is madder than ever, but he begins to soften up when he hears his own name in Calvin's bedtime prayers. He tells him that his parents are gone, which makes him an orphan too. In the morning, the coach asks them if they had a good night's sleep, since Tracy looks very tired. Calvin tells him about the girl and how much fun they had, not realizing he's snitching. Wagner reminds them that curfew is at midnight and there's a no lady in the room policy. If Tracy gets caught again, he'll be suspended. Calvin tries to apologize, but Tracy just says they shouldn't hang out anymore. Angry or not, he can't deny Calvin's talent and absolute success on the court. Every team they face has a player telling a reporter that the kid is a joke, only to be humiliated by him right after. He gradually becomes a huge NBA star, and now he's able to afford expensive gifts for the orphanage kids. Other famous players come to get his autograph now. Sadly, the fame card has no effect on Sister Theresa, who keeps the entire stadium waiting until his homework is done. When he's back at the orphanage, Murph asks him what it's like to be famous. Calvin says it's fantastic. Those people who complain about it to Oprah are either crazy or they haven't discovered room service yet. That's just too much for Ox. He tries to take sneakers from him, but Stan steps in to stop him. For the first time ever, threatening to lock Ox in the basement, he makes it very clear that Calvin is more important than the other kids because he's a source of income now. If things haven't changed much around Chesterfield, we can't say the same about the Knights. A player named Jode is beginning to bond with Calvin as they play video games. Talking about Tracy's grumpy mood, Jode says his dad is actually alive. They just don't talk anymore. The boy wastes no time before confronting his idol, but Tracy refuses to talk about it. He asks Calvin to wait in the car while he picks up his medicine at the drugstore. It's getting close to midnight, but it's a short trip, no biggie, except that there's a pretty girl behind the counter. And she's a big fan, more than ready to play doctor. As the conversation takes much longer than necessary, Calvin tries to get his attention, with no success. Tracy is so distracted, he doesn't even pay attention to which medicine he's taking and ends up popping 2 sleeping pills. Before he even starts the car, he's already yawning and talking crazy. When he begins to snore, Calvin realizes it's an emergency. Desperate times, insane decisions. Sitting on the spare tire to adjust for his height, the 13-year-old boy drives back to the hotel, causing sizable damage along the way. In the morning, Tracy finds out that Calvin got benched for joyriding last night. Jode tells him that the boy was just making sure he made his curfew, and then took all the blame. Tracy is very grateful for that, so he's much nicer to Calvin now. He talks to him on the flight home, and thanks him for having his back. At Chesterfield, Murph is sad to see that all the families are there just to see the NBA star. Calvin points out that his contract forbids adoption, but Reg says he shouldn't believe everything Stan says. And she's right. Those families were sent by Coach Wagner. He's on the phone with Stan, telling him that the boy deserves a home and what he's doing is wrong. Confronted by Calvin, Stan decides to change his strategy. He says he'll arrange appointments with the best candidates. Of course, he does the exact opposite. Disheartened about that, and the geometry test he has tomorrow, Calvin sneaks out to visit Tracy. The fact that lives in a mansion full of cool stuff is no surprise, but his knowledge of geometry does catch the boy off guard. He explains it to Calvin using the connection with basketball. The lesson is very productive, so it's gotta end in a goofy celebration involving orange paint. A few weeks later, Calvin decides to return the favor. He says there's a fan who wants to see him very badly. Tracy gets angry to see his father instead of a pretty girl. He tells Calvin to stay out of this. He's just a kid and doesn't understand. Their next game is a huge disappointment for everyone. Obviously, their performance is reflecting the problems in their friendship. Coach Wagner is furious and warns them to get their act together before the big game against the Toronto Raptors. Both teams need a victory to make the playoffs. Meanwhile, Calvin is getting to know the Bullieds, the only nice couple who managed to contact him despite Stan's efforts. He leaves Murph in charge of the precious MJs while he attends a fancy and boring brunch. With a little help from the orphanage bullies, Stan forces Murph to say where the shoes are hidden. Then, put $100,000 on the Raptors. 20 minutes before the game, Calvin realizes the MGs are missing. Stan has them locked up in his safe. The kids team up against him to retrieve the sneakers. Too worried about the bet, he can't even bother to pretend he cares about Ox. So he loses his only ally, who also happens to be the only kid who knows the combination to the safe. The Knights are trailing by 21 points when their savior makes an entrance. Everyone is relieved to see Calvin, and he does make a huge difference. But the magic sneakers get destroyed during the game. He's forced to confess he has no real talent, but still plays well enough to help Tracy get that last score. The team wins, and there's a huge celebration. Calvin decides he won't play anymore because he wants to be a regular kid again, but he is sad to part ways with Tracy. He also doesn't really feel like the Bullieds are the right family for him. So he goes back to the orphanage, which is now sponsored by the LA Knights. No one has seen Stan Biddleman since that last game. With no money to cover that bet, he had to run away and hide. Tracy comes by to thank Calvin for everything. He says he's back in touch with his dad, and now he has made a decision. He wants to adopt both Calvin. The boy is not only happy to hear that, but also glad to inform that today is a 2-for-1 day, which means he'll have to take Murph too. And this is the end. This was a recap of the 2002 movie, Like Mike by NBA Entertainment, starring Lil Bow Wow and Morris Chestnut. So, who is the worst adult in this story? And who's the best kid? Let us know in the comments below with #CinemaRecap. Until next time.